Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's video, we will review the May 2025 paper for A levels AQA, sections A and B, Approaches in Psychology and Biopsychology. The results for May 2025 have just come out yesterday, and there's been a lot of discussion over why some students who have been scoring A's and A stars in class tests have ended up getting B or lower grades in the paper. And the conclusion that most teachers have drawn is that students just prepare certain fixed answers for every topic, and regardless of how the question is phrased, they end up writing that answer only. They do not modify or adapt their answers to the question asked. So that's going to be my main focus today, how you should write in a way that meets the requirements of the question stated, and that you don't give blank rote learned answers. That is why in this video I want to make it quick also. I know lengthy videos require a lot of patience, which nowadays students are not having. So I will just go over some bullet points which will help to support the point that I'm making. So I'll use them for illustration to support the type of answers you should be writing for every question. But otherwise, if you need full answers, like if you need model answers, you need to see a proper written answer in front of you. I'm making proper answers also available for download in the description box below. You can see the link for them. And in the pinned comment also you will find. So you can download the full answers from my website. Okay, let's look at the first question that comes under approaches. Anyways, I get requested a lot to cover approaches videos. So students are always looking out for some help in this topic. The first question asked here is, describe how Skinner investigated the effect of reinforcement on behavior. In this question, what are they asking you? They are asking you how. How always means you have to give some process or some procedure. The mistake here is to give some sort of contribution that Skinner has made, like what he said about reinforcement that has impacted study of other behaviors. That is not what they're asking you for. So some students have answered this question in terms of how Skinner developed the concept of reinforcement and say today it is being used to award children and encourage pro-social behaviors in them. That is not what the question is asking you for. Another mistake is to write about what was good about Skinner's research. Like it was very controlled, it was done on animals, and therefore the results that we get are free from confounding variables that could come from studying humans. Like, for example, humans' own cognitions could influence the results, which is not the case with animals. So, simply SR models have been used by Skinner. Again, that is not what the question is asking you for. This is a very simple AO1 type of question in which you are just to describe what steps Skinner did to develop the concept of reinforcement. That's all, nothing else. So you should not interpret the question in the wrong direction. Now, if I go for it content wise, you must have learned a lot about how Skinner did his research. So, you must have learned about his dog experiments, then his rat experiments, his pigeon experiments. You must have learned about reinforcement, different types of reinforcement, as well as punishment. But the question is only for 4 marks. You can't give everything in this. So select some one section which you can best describe. It can be any. There's no fixed section that you have to give. Just stick to that section and give 4 unique points to justify 4 marks. That's all. So that is all that is required to answer this question. To make it even more clear to you, as I told you, I've included some rough points on what can be covered. Let's quickly go over them. I have taken Skinner box in my answer because Skinner box is the most common thing that will come to mind when we think of how Skinner did his studies. So Skinner's box, originally in them there were hungry rats. If you're talking about the later experiments with pigeons, you could replace this with pigeons. Now, as I told you, the focus has to be on how the process. So what would these hungry rats have to do in the box? What was Skinner observing in these boxes? That is what you need to describe. So the hungry rats, they would press the lever or the switch whenever they were hungry, because Skinner had made the mechanism in a way that a food pellet would drop whenever they pressed the lever. And then they would receive positive reinforcement. The food itself was positive reinforcement because it would extinguish their hunger and give them a desirable feeling. And eventually, this is how they started pressing the lever deliberately. Okay. Originally, they did it uh, accidentally. And then when they realized that that is what gives them reward in the form of food, they deliberately started pressing the liver. So in the answer that I'm speaking out, I want you to notice it's all about the how. First Skinner did this, then the rats did this, then this is what the rats did. That is how you have to keep answering the question. And when finally no pellets were coming, like at one point Skinner stopped releasing the pellets into the box, then they stopped pressing the lever. That means their behavior of pressing the lever got extinguished in the absence of reward. So this is my answer, 4 points for 4 marks. Alternatively, you could talk about, say, punishment. So you could, no doubt they've asked effect of reinforcement, but you could include, say, 1 2 points on reinforcement and punishment. That is also correct, because that was also one way of indirectly investigating reinforcement. So you could talk about the electric shocks that rats were given, and then how they would not press the lever to avoid the shocks. That you could give a negative reinforcement also. So just select any one experiment that you want to take from Skinner and describe how it was conducted. The next question that had come in this paper was outline how evolution might influence behavior. Give an example from a topic in psychology. When a question is in two parts, like you can see, one is how evolution might influence behavior. That will be worth 2 marks. And then the example that they've asked you from psychology, that will be worth another 2 marks. So when there are two questions rolled into one, equal marks are assigned to both usually. So then you have to think of 2 points you can give for how evolution affects behavior, and then take an example from a topic. Here the mistake is to treat the two questions as if they are separate, in the sense that how evolution influences behavior is a different thing altogether, and then the topic which is taken is not related to the answer given to the first part. If they wanted you to give separate answers, they could have split it into two questions or at least two parts, but they have rolled it into one question. So there has to be some connection in the answer for sure. Okay, so keeping this in mind, we will give 2 unique points for how evolution influences behavior and 2 points for the example. Again, it is about how. So do not go into strengths and weaknesses. This part is descriptive, it is AO1. And the next part is AO2, because you have to give an example, means you have to apply whatever you're giving to a topic area. So nowhere do you have to go into AO3 or strengths and weaknesses. Also, don't go into definition of what is evolution. Teachers have noted this also last time, that no matter what is asked, students just start defining and describing concepts, even if that is not a requirement. So no need to define what evolution is or to give irrelevant examples, generic examples of evolution. The question is just asking you about how, not what evolution is. So keeping these things in mind, let's look at an answer. I have selected how evolution can influence behavior through natural selection. That is, it can help survival and reproduction to be passed on from generation to generation. As you know, natural selection is about selecting the best of the species that can preserve the coming generations. So then whatever behaviors are done by these members of the species, they become widespread because they can help the whole species for survival. Now, because I've spoken about survival, reproduction, a related topic to that, like no doubt it's from the syllabus, but related to the point made, is Bowlby's attachment theory. I'm sure most of you must be thinking about this. I've taken it also because this is the most common one that students discuss. Bowlby has proposed that children show social releases, like they cry, they cling to the caregiver. This is a part of their evolutionary inheritance. Why they do this is because when they cry and they cling, they get attention from their caregiver, which helps them to survive. Like they can always have their caregiver with them. So, for my point that I selected, like one influence of evolution which I selected, survival, that relates with Bowlby. If you're selecting something else, you might take another example from a topic. Just make sure it's not a general example, it has to be from the syllabus. So, for example, you could talk about how evolution impacts mate selection or attraction, especially if you're doing psychology of relationships in the second year, you might be taking that. So first you could say it influences attraction, and then from relationships topic you could talk about how males are more likely to select fertile females and females are likely to select resourceful males. So that can be another example. Here I want you to note one more thing, that when they say an example from a topic, And they don't mention it has to be from year 1 or year 2, which they usually don't. You're free to take from any year. I took from year 1 attachment because most of you would know about it. But if you want to take from year 2, paper 3 type of topics, you can take from there also. And there are lots of other possible examples even from your AS level that you could give here. So anything from social influence, memory, so forth, any topic you could give over here. The next was a 16 marker, and 16 markers also I get requested for a lot. In this lesson, like I told you, my objective is to be brief, but if you need complete coverage on 16 markers, I have covered such videos before. So if you look at my dedicated videos on 16 markers, I have covered the ones with scenarios also, without scenarios also. Then you will get a full idea of how to write your 16 marker essay. So as of now, I will not go in complete details. I will just discuss how much is relevant to this question. So this time they had asked about describe and evaluate the psychodynamic approach in psychology. I remember when this question came up, students were a little disappointed because they were expecting a more narrowed down focus of the question if it comes to psychodynamic approach. As you know, there are many sub theories in this approach. So when like everything is asked for, it's so broad that just give the psychodynamic approach. It becomes difficult what to focus on. So when such a question comes, you have to try to cover everything in brief. Again, I would like to emphasize this is one area where you might feel especially you need a model answer in front of you. Like, how is this exactly put down in the answer? So again, you can visit the link I've given below and download the answers from there. I'm sure you know by now that in a 16 marker AO1 or description is for 6 marks. So just listing, mainly because we can't give that much depth when all of psychodynamic is asked for. So listing and briefly defining different concepts of psychodynamic approach, that has counted for 6 marks in AO1. And AO3 is for 10 marks. As always, 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses, preferably give one with a study, preferably give a counterpoint in some point, that way. So following those standard rules only we have to answer. Let's look at a sample for this one. In Freud's theory, I'm sure most of you would begin with unconscious processes. That is the central premise of his theory, that whatever behavior we engage in is motivated by unconscious processes. So definitely 1 or 2 lines on what the unconscious is and how it propels behavior. Next, the iceberg model, you could also call it the Freud's model of consciousness. Conscious, subconscious, if you want to include, that is pre-conscious, and the unconscious mind. So one line defining each. What are each of these levels of consciousness? Then personality, Freud's theory of personality. What are the 3 parts of personality, or the tripartite model? So what is id, ego, superego? Mainly focusing on the principles that they work on. Id working on pleasure principle, ego on reality, and superego on morality. It is beyond the scope of this lesson to explain all these concepts. I'm not getting into that. But just keep on noting that you have to give one line for each of these things that I have placed here. So you should be knowing the definitions of these. Then there are defense mechanisms. You could give one line defining what a defense mechanism is, like the ego strategy to reduce anxiety, developing from the clash between id and superego, something like that. And then I have given like 3 examples here. You could also just name multiple examples in the paper, or you could just give, say, 2 examples of defense mechanisms and give one line defining each. That approach is up to you. But the key thing is to mention defense mechanisms. And then, of course, psychosexual stages of development, and how if the conflicts on each are resolved successfully, that leads to healthy personality. But if there is fixation on any stage, that can lead to personality problems in adulthood. So when Freud's theory is asked for and they haven't really told us which section to focus on, we need to give all of it. Unconscious, levels of consciousness model, personality model, defense mechanisms, and psychosexual stages. So you can see all of this is a part of AO1. You will have to go for breadth instead of depth here, because again, there's no one topic in focus. You have to touch on all of them. So you can't take every topic in depth. Now coming to AO3. Given it very briefly, but actually when you're writing, you need to put it in proper peel format, as we always do. So one strength of this theory is that it has inspired a lot of later approaches. It has been very heuristic, in the sense that it was one of the first and only theories to talk about unconscious influences. So a lot of researchers were inspired to look into how unconscious defense mechanisms, etc., influence behavior. So it has contributed a lot in the way of psychology. For a study supporting the theory, I have taken Little Hands because most of us know about that. That's an easy one. If you can give some modern study which is supporting concepts like implicit memory and indirectly supporting the unconscious, those are also very desirable. So you could just very briefly summarize Little Hands case study, how it supports Oedipus complex in psychosexual stages, and that would be a support point. You can take it in fact as a weakness also because it's a case study, not very generalizable, prone to biases, but I have chosen to take it as a strength, as some amount of empirical evidence for the psychodynamic approach. Weaknesses wise, definitely it's very difficult to operationalize the concepts given by Freud, for example the unconscious. It is difficult to put down into observable behaviors because by definition it is something that is latent and hidden. So it can be very difficult to conduct research and verify Freud's theory. So that's a major weakness of untestable concepts. And because there are a lot of case studies supporting Freud's theory, like Little Hands or Ratman, the validity of these case studies is very questionable because very few people are represented in them. So whether what is found from them would generalize to everybody challenges the generalizability of his concepts. Now, if I'm to give a counterpoint here, I could say that definitely it enables in depth investigation. So, no doubt generalizability is poor, but with the help of case studies, let's say Little Hands, for example, how Oedipus complex develops, what are the dynamics involved in it, as well as how it can eventually get resolved through psychotherapy. We get to study in a lot of detail because case study methodology has been used. So this would be my suggestion for how you should go about writing an answer for a very broad approach that comes up in the paper. Okay, this completes the approaches in psychology section. Now we can head over to biopsychology for the same paper. Okay, in biopsychology, the first question that came up is a very straightforward descriptive question. Name one type of neuron and briefly explain its function. So completely AO1. There are three types of neurons that we learn about: sensory, motor, and interneuron. I know there are other classifications, but in our syllabus, there are these three types. As such, there was no room for making an error in this, and most students have scored well because literally it's just about naming the neuron and getting 1 mark for that, and just defining it and getting another mark because the definition includes the function. But still, where students have made mistake is just giving a general definition of neuron, not realizing that motor, sensory, interneurons are types of neurons. There they have made mistake. Alternatively, in the function, like after identifying that sensory neuron, for example, is one neuron, instead of giving its function, just mentioning where it is located instead. So definitionally, you have to go for the function rather than where it is situated. So simple answer for this would involve one sentence on one type of neuron is a sensory neuron. And the second sentence, its function is to carry information from, you could say, effectors or receptors to the CNS. I'm sorry, not effectors, from sensory receptors to the central nervous system, or you could just say brain and spinal cord. Alternatively, say you're taking motor neuron, whichever neuron you're taking, you have to go about the same way. So, motor neuron is one type of neuron, and its work is to take information from the CNS to the effectors. That's all to this answer. The next question was, using an example of hormone, outline the function of the endocrine system. This is very similar to a previous question which we saw in approaches, where one part of the answer is giving an example and one part is like giving the definition. So here it's very simple. First you name a hormone. So you name it correctly, you'll get 1 mark. Second is outline its function of the hormone first before going into endocrine system. You could get a 2nd mark there. Next, explain how this relates to general functions of the endocrine system, like how it represents what hormones usually do. You get a 3rd mark there. And 4th mark is to elaborate further or to explain further what is the functioning of endocrine system, how is it contributing to behavior. So again, straightforward 4 marks. The biggest mistake here is to confuse between hormones and neurotransmitters. So for example, giving the function of dopamine or serotonin, students have actually lost marks for this because those are not hormones. Those are neurotransmitters. So again, as I was telling you in the beginning, while students have lost marks this time, good students, not having clarity, this is one more reason, like what concept has to be put where. And that's why not being able to read the question correctly. Now, the hormone which I've identified is thyroxine. Ideally, do mention from which gland that particular hormone which you have chosen is released. So, in this case, it is released from thyroid gland, and function wise, like I told you, outline its function. It is to regulate metabolism in the body. Cell growth is regulated. When there are high levels of thyroxine, there is faster metabolism, and when there are low levels, there's slower metabolism, which can result in weight gain, for example. Now, how does this show the functioning of endocrine system? Because that is what the endocrine system does. It releases hormones into the bloodstream, and thereby they regulate bodily processes. Like thyroxine in this case is regulating cell metabolism. So it is representing the typical function of a hormone. You might find the answer is arranged in a way maybe contrary to your expectation. Endocrine system is mentioned first and then hormones are given. That's fine. The point has to be put across correctly. Okay. Now coming to the next question. Explain the process of synaptic transmission. Refer to excitation in your answer. We looked at so many how questions in the beginning in approaches. And we saw within how we have to give process. That means within process we have to give how. So again, common mistakes are to talk about the problems of synaptic transmission. Although this section as such in the textbook doesn't have evaluation, no strengths and weaknesses. Still somehow bringing up strengths and weaknesses. Like what problems can come in transmission of neurotransmitters, or how like actually there have been answers relating it to depression, that because of lack of reuptake the individual might be suffering from depression. These type of things are not to be answered at all. Firstly, they are not asking you with reference to any specific behavior or disorder. Overall, how synaptic transmission takes place for any behavior, that is what they're asking you. The second part of it refer to excitation. That is definitely, it's already a part of synaptic transmission, but because there's so much that you can include under synaptic transmission, they have particularly highlighted excitation to make it clear to you that you include this one. Here, I want you to note a broader principle of assessment in the question paper. Many times we feel that because, if synaptic transmission comes in the paper, we will not have to give all the steps. Usually it comes for a short answer. So let us learn only very few steps. And then what happens is when they mention something like this, something specific, like you have to give excitation, you're not ready for it because you excluded it when you were learning. This only goes to show you in preparation, whether you like it or not, you have to prepare everything. So when you're preparing synaptic transmission, even if it's going to come only for short answers, you cannot afford to skip anything because what you're skipping might be the point that they might ask for in the paper. Okay, now how to structure this answer? It is process, just think of it sequentially. Step by step, give 4 steps. This happens and this happens and this happens in the process of synaptic transmission. Make sure one of it is excitation. So I'm not putting down any points because it's literally just thinking step by step. So what happens first? There is an impulse or that electric charge which travels through the cell body and reaches the end of the neuron. You can use proper terms also like axon terminals instead of end of neuron. That's good in fact. But don't use absolutely casual language. Instead of end of neuron, if you just say last part of the cell or something, no. At least use the word neuron. If you can use a highly specific term like axon terminal, that's the best. Then what happens once the impulse reaches the axon terminal? There is a release of neurotransmitter into the synapse. So you can mention that next. So keep on thinking what happens next, what happens next. Once that neurotransmitter is released into the synapse, from there it will adhere to or it will bind to another neuron. If you again here you can be more specific, receptors on the dendrite of the next neuron. You can posit it that way. And finally, because they've said we have to cover excitation, it will come at this stage only. Like upon reception only, you'll be able to explain that excitation can occur. Because that is when either an excitatory impact takes place on the receiving neuron or an inhibitory one. So excitation would just mean that the next neuron will also release an electric impulse and that also becomes likely to fire. So you can end it with this. Alternatively, if you want to focus, like begin with, the receptors receive the neurotransmitter and then there can be either excitation or inhibition. and you want to explain the inhibitory process also, that is also absolutely fine. There are no rigid rules of exactly which points you have to cover. In the biopsychology section, instead of giving a 16 marker this time, they gave a 6 marker and an 8 marker. So first let's look at the 6 marker. This question has been discussed a lot this time. How fMRI might be used to affect Sam's memory. Okay, I think this question has got missed in this. I'll just post the question quickly. The scenario has been missed here. Okay, so sorry about that. The scenario is there here now. Sam has started to have short-term memory problems. He forgets things he has just read, but remembers what people have just said to him. Explain how fMRI might be used to study Sam's memory. Why this question was discussed a lot, because many students, again, they did not read the question carefully and they just kept on describing blankly what is fMRI, how it is a method of scanning the brain, how it is functional rather than structural. They did not engage with Sam's scenario at all. That is where most students have lost marks. So keep in mind the general principle when a situation is given, regardless of what is asked after that. It is an EO2 question, it's an application question. So your entire focus has to be on explaining the STEM given. If they just wanted to know generally what fMRI is, they would have asked you a question, what is fMRI, for 6 marks. The fact that they've given you a full STEM is because they want you to apply fMRI knowledge to it. Means you keep on using wording from the STEM and keep on explaining with the help of that what is fMRI. Secondly, you keep on talking about fMRI in relation to memory. There are a lot of purposes for what fMRI could be used. Memory is not the only one. fMRI is also used to assess other cognitive processes, like you must have gone over the course. Attention, perception, so forth, and also to study many disorders. But the question is asking you only about memory. So your focus has to be only on memory, not on any other behavior, not on any psychopathology. So it's like when you see the word fMRI in the paper, it doesn't mean anything, whatever you can remember in the syllabus from fMRI, you give that. They've given you a very specific situation, a very specific cognitive process, so that you talk only about that and nothing else. So here, now with the help of the model answer, I'll show you how every point needs to be applicative. One or two general points describing fMRI is fine. But the major part of the answer has to be about supporting what is happening in Sam's case with fMRI. So one line can be a general definition of fMRI. It is a functional scanning which looks at change in blood oxygen levels to detect where there is more activity in the brain. As simple as that. Now start relating it to Sam's situation. Sam's case, fMRI, is being used to study his response to reading tasks and listening tasks. So first we engage in that way, just naming for what purpose fMRI is being used. So showing to the examiner that we understand where fMRI is being applied for this situation or for what objective it's being applied. Memory is very broad, but exactly for what it is being used, visual reading and auditory listening memory tasks. Next, how is fMRI going to help? That is the major section. How is it going to help in the investigation or study? Because fMRI, it denotes activation patterns. Basically, it denotes which brain areas are active. And that is only what is going to be done in his case. Because it's a visual memory task, which areas in his occipital lobe are becoming active, which is the visual lobe of the brain. And also because it's a listening task, auditory temporal lobe is relevant there. So which areas are becoming active in his temporal lobe? fMRI is going to detect activation in these two areas. In the course, generally you have learned that fMRI can identify activity in very minute brain areas. So now that is only what you're applying to Sam's context. That in his case, because visual and auditory areas are being engaged, so it's going to be the occipital and the temporal lobe that are going to be detected by the fMRI, like activity in these lobes is going to be detected. This is something of what we can consider as a synoptic question. We have to apply some knowledge of fMRI also, of memory also. We have to reconcile everything. So be aware that these type of questions do come. Besides that, it will also help to understand if Sam is having any memory issues. Here you can bring in the element of fMRI helping to detect any brain issues. But of course, only in relation to Sam, not in relation to any irrelevant psychopathologies here. So if Sam does not perform well on this task, maybe because of some memory issue, it will be detected by the fMRI. Why the researcher might be doing such a study? Because he seems to have certain issues. They don't do it for just about everybody. In fact, explicitly they have mentioned he's forgetting things. That is why. So any issues with his forgetting, like brain related issues because of which he's forgetting, that the fMRI will be able to detect. Again, engaging as much as possible with the STEM, making use of all information they have given in the STEM in this way. Finally, fMRI's larger purpose is to guide treatment. Like once we come to know what problems are there with the fMRI, then we can use that information for further selecting proper treatment plans. Like we know this area is damaged in the brain, how that for that area we can do some intervention. We use fMRI for that. So again, fMRI will enable targeted treatment and correct diagnosis of his problem. So we can end that way. So, what I want you to take away from this discussion is when a question of this nature comes, which many students were not expecting, first of all, expect these questions. And secondly, make sure to make your complete focus the situation given. That is only how you can score 6 marks. Anything irrelevant and you lose marks. Final question that came in this section is what we call half an essay, 8 marker. What research has shown about hemispheric lateralization? As you must know already, it's a discuss question and it's for 8 marks. It's half of the 16 marker. So AO1 is 4 marks. I'm sorry, AO1 is 3 marks and AO3 is 5 marks in this question. I just explained to you how going about writing a 16 marker in the approaches section. So here we will apply the same principles, but we'll just cut short the points when we are going about for an 8 marker. So in the 3 marker part, we'll just give descriptions of what we have learned about research into hemispheric lateralization, and AO3 will give one strength and one weakness. In the 16 marker, we give two strengths, two weaknesses, we'll reduce it into half. Now in AO3, just see carefully. Here also it was a part of discussion, this question, why students lost marks. Two reasons. One, not talking about research, just talking about lateralization in general. The question has asked you for research in the area, not just the concept. Not any specific research. It's not that you have to only give some particular study, but overall what research has found, and if you want some specific study also, but some research has to be there. Second reason for losing marks is that research is not explicitly linked to lateralization. Like the research has been described or the study has been described for its own sake. It has not been linked to the larger concept of lateralization. This is why students lost marks in this question despite knowing the content. So now with the help of the points, I will show you how you are supposed to write this. Again, definitely you can begin with a general definition of lateralization. Dominance of one hemisphere in certain functions or behaviors. You could give examples. The right hemisphere is found to be dominant in visuospatial analysis and the left hemisphere in language comprehension and production. As far as research is concerned, I think most of you will bring up Sperry or Gazzaniga and Sperry and Gazzaniga. So you can take Sperry split brain patients. If you want, you can take a specific study done by him or just general. So you could just describe one or two tasks, like they had to sit and feel objects from their hands, and because they were split brain patients, Sperry was looking at whether they'll be able to name the objects or not. Or the visual task, you could describe that objects were presented in only one visual field and he was seeing whether they would be able to name it. That you can describe. Now to connect it with lateralization, you also have to mention that this would show whether their functions are highly lateralized or whether the corpus callosum is still able to communicate and engage both the hemispheres in their task. That is what Sperry was looking out for. So make sure to link back at the end to get full 3 marks in AO1. Okay, again, if you need a model answer for this, you need to see exactly how it is written down. You can download the document that I have attached in the description box and pinned comment. Now coming to the AO3, strengths and weaknesses part. Unlike the 16 marker, we don't follow very rigid rules, but I still prefer give some strength and weakness. If you can give some study in a strength, give that, but overall it's about research, so you might not want to give added studies in AO3. Then some evaluation of the research presented in AO1, you could give that, and preferably give a counterpoint somewhere. For his strength, I have evaluated Sperry's study instead of adding another study. The good thing about his studies was that they were very controlled. The presentation of task stimuli for the task was very controlled. Like I've given a specific example also on the visual field task in which they had to identify some object in either right or left visual field. The presentation of the stimulus would be strictly for less than a second. It was very well timed. So that way, Sperry could be sure that there was no confounding in terms of the other eye also being able to see the object. Strictly one eye could see it, and then he could decide. Means one eye, I mean one visual field, either right or left could see the object, and then he could be sure that whatever identification is taking place is strictly taking place from only one hemisphere. Means his research is very credible or very valid because of all the control. Weakness wise, generalizability is very difficult because these are split brain patients. So, even if lateralization is seen in them, it might not be seen in the general population, which does not suffer from a break in their corpus callosum. To give a counterpoint, however, even though it is limited to split brain patients, the research also them suffering from epilepsy further confounds the results because their brain might be working unusually because of epilepsy. Still, we get very valuable insights into specialization, which were very difficult at the time Sperry did his study. Because modern technology was not available then to see lateralized functions as it is today. So, for example, fMRI or PET technology was not available. So, classical value and contribution to research has been immense of Sperry's studies. Okay, so this is my suggestion on how the May 2025 paper could be answered. And I hope you have learned broader principles of answering the paper rather than specific answers to the questions. That was my objective. I am a psychology tutor. I take AQA, GCSE, and A levels tuitions. So if you want to book your classes with me, you can check out my contact details in the description box and pinned comment below. That's it for this video. I'll try to cover the next section, research methods, also soon. And if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments box. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.